Journal, Center for Land Warfare Studies. It is my honor to welcome you all to Journal K. Sundarji Memorial Lecture 2025. The schedule for today's program is as shown on the screen. It is a privilege to gather under the aegis of a legacy
Journal,
that
Center
continues
for Land
to
Warfare
inspire,
Studies.
instruct,
It is my
and
honor
illuminate the
to
path
welcome you all
forward
to
for
Journal K.
India's
Sundarji
strategic
Memorial
future.
Lecture
This year's theme,
2025.
Safeguarding the Future,
The schedule for today's
National
program
Security
is as
Challenges
shown
on the
on the
path to
screen.
Viksit Bharat, echoes the vision of a
It is
man
a privilege
who was
to
far
gather
ahead
under the
of his
aegis
time,
of a legacy
and
journal,
who
Center
foresaw
for
the
Land
need for
Warfare
quiet
Studies.
evolution
It is my
and
honor
illuminates the
to
path
welcome you all
forward
to
for
Journal K.
India's
Sundarji
strategic
Memorial
Sundarji,
Lecture
Param Vishis
2025.
Safeguarding the
The schedule for today's program
was not
is
just a
as
military
shown on the
commander,
screen.
he was a visionary,
Echoes the
reformer,
vision of a
and
man. It is a
strategist
privilege
who was
to gather
ideas
under the
and
aegis
vision
of a
India's
legacy
defense
journal,
and
Center for
foresaw
Land
the need for
Warfare
quiet
Studies.
evolution.
It is my honor to welcome you all to Journal K. Sundarji Memorial Lecture 2025.
Mechanization, embracing emerging technologies, and redefining the very nature of warfare. What set Journal Sundarji apart was his recognition that national security is a multidimensional endeavor. He believed it demanded not just military strength, but an agile, integrated response to the changing character of conflict, where information warfare, cyber threats, border challenges, technological race, and internal stability all converge. He was amongst the earliest voices to advocate for nuclear deterrence as a pillar for strategic autonomy, while also pushing the reforms that strengthened institutional preparedness and interagency cooperation. His foresight in preparing the armed forces for a spectrum of challenges from conventional conflict to unconventional threats remains unmatched. He was also a diplomat in fatigues, believing deeply in military diplomacy, strategic alliances, and international defense collaboration as key levers to safeguard India's sovereignty and enhance its global standing. Today, as we navigate an increasingly complex security landscape marked by geopolitical shifts, disruptive technologies, and hybrid threats, his ideas serve as a lodestar. His belief that safeguarding the nation's future required a whole-of-system approach, uniting defense capabilities with policy foresight, scientific innovation, and institutional resilience feels more urgent than ever. As India strides towards becoming a Viksit Bharat, the relevance of his ideas only grows deeper. In this era of fast-evolving threats and shifting geopolitical landscapes, we return to his towering legacy for both clarity and discretion. This morning, ladies and gentlemen, is dedicated to exploring that legacy, not as a history, but as a living, breathing guide to the future. To begin the program, ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to witness a short film that captures the story of a proud and powerful fraternity, the Mechanized Infantry, a force that was born of Journal Sundarji's vision and continues to represent speech, precision, and transformation. Ladies and gentlemen, let's take a moment to honor this journey.
General Krishna Swami Sundarji, Param Vishisht Seva Medal, was an exceptional soldier, scholar, legendary military leader, and a visionary. Known for his quick silver brilliance and strategic thinking, he was unequivocally acknowledged both in India and across the world as one of the intellectually soundest supporters of nuclear deterrence. He was India's have muscles, will flex army chief and said, "It's not good enough to be strong. You have to be perceived to be strong and to have the will to use that strength."
Born on the 30th of April 1928 at Chengalpat in Tamil Nadu, he was commissioned into the Mahar Regiment in 1946 and soon saw action in 1947-48 against the Pakistani tribal raiders in Jammu and Kashmir. In 1963, he won accolades as Chief of Staff of the Katanga Command in the United Nations mission in Congo. He further demonstrated his military acumen as commanding officer of 1st Mahar in Kutch sector in 1965 Indo-Pak War and as Brigadier General Staff of a Corps in Rangpur sector during the 1971 Bangladesh War.
A graduate of the Defence Services Staff College, Wellington, and Command and General Staff College, Fort Leavenworth, USA, the General commanded the Armored Division, 33 Corps, and the Western Army, where he oversaw Operation Blue Star, till he rose to be the Chief of the Army Staff in 1986. He was awarded Mention in Dispatches for his distinguished role with the UN troops and Param Vishisht Seva Medal in 1978 for his distinguished services of the most exceptional order.
General Sundarji was flamboyant, donned black dungarees and black goggles, and had a penchant for being upfront by landing in choppers in the thick of battle and exercises. His dynamic leadership, total commitment, and bold and innovative thinking has left its stamp on the Indian Army. He firmly believed in the adage, to win a battle, mobility of forces is essential. But to win a war, mental mobility of its commanders is a prerequisite.
Soon after the transformation of the Armored Corps, the General was instrumental in raising of the Mechanized Infantry Regiment. As the first Colonel of the Mechanized Infantry Regiment, his vision and ideas of professionalism became the beacon and guiding force for all ranks, nurturing and steering them through their early days, thus providing a rock-solid foundation.
Rightly regarded as the father of the regiment, he remained a guiding star for the mechanized infantry, exhorting to always strive for excellence. It was due to his foresight and vision that the mechanized infantry regiment is considered as tomorrow's regiment in today's army and is now a formidable and integral part of the Indian Army's punch.
During his tenure as the Army Chief, General Sundarji vigorously pursued the reforms envisaged by General K.V. Krishna Rao's expert committee. He drafted position papers, the long-term threat evaluation up to 2015, to include the National Strategic Doctrine and visualized an integrated battlefield, not in terms of individual services, but the armed forces as a whole. Towards defense of the nation and India's role as a sub-regional power, General Sundarji's tenure as the chief was highlighted by eviction of Chinese army from Somdurongchu by quickly landing a brigade at Zimthang, north of Tawang, during Operation Falcon, Operation Pavan in Sri Lanka, and Operation Cactus Lily in Maldives.
Amongst the Indian Army's most articulate generals, he conceived and conducted the Army's largest military exercise, Operation Brustax, near the Indo-Pak border on the Western Front. General Sundarji was the pioneer of nuclear doctrine and strategy in the Indian Army and wrote the Indian Nuclear Doctrine along with Admiral Tahiliani, the then Chief of Naval Staff. It is a tribute to his application to detail that much of what he had worked upon and expounded in the 80s is the nucleus for discussion on possible strategies in the post-Shakti environment. His book on the subject, The Blind Men of Hindustan, continues to be quoted even now.
General Sundarji's bold conceptualization of Indian strategy, uncluttered vision, and a burning ambition to see the country miles ahead of its nearest rivals were classic. His book, Vision 2100, A Strategy for the 21st Century, is a magnum opus on his forward thinking about our security in the decades ahead.
General Sundarji liked spending time with friends and family. He was equally socially active and would mix around with people and share light moments. Post-retirement, the General continued to work towards articulating India's position on nuclear and other security issues.
It was on 8th February 1999 that he left for heavenly abode, leaving behind a well-nurtured and a modern army in the making, and a partially completed autobiography titled Of Some Consequence, A Soldier Remembers. We salute this great son of the soil
and the most charismatic leader of all times.
Before we begin the formal proceedings, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to introduce the speaker who will be addressing today's welcome address. Major General R.P.S. Bhadoria, VSM, is presently the Additional Director General of Center for Land Warfare Studies, CLAWS, in New Delhi, and former Director of Center for Strategic Studies and Simulation, CS3, at the United Service Institution of India. He retired from the faculty at the National Defense College in New Delhi after serving in the Indian Army for 36 years. He's commanded a mountain division and brigade on India's northern borders. He has the unique experience of raising two large formations, the division and the mountain corps. He has a vast experience in anti-terrorist operations, both in terms of policy formulation and at the execution level. He has held many prestigious staff appointments at the Army headquarters. He holds a Master's of Philosophy degree in National Security and Strategic Studies from Madras University. He is an alumni at the National Defense College and has also attended a course on politics and strategic affairs at Escola Superior de Guerra at Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He specializes in scenario-based strategic gaming exercises and regularly conducts exercises for the National Defense College, the Army War College, and the Indian Foreign Service Institute of India. He steered the making of a computer-aided decision-making tool at theater level in partnership with Institute for Strategic Study Analysis, ISSA. He researches strategic and security issues in the Indo-Pacific region and in South Asia. He writes regularly for the publications and other journals. He has also edited the book, Transnational Terrorism, Evolving Threats and Responses. To formally inaugurate today's proceedings, ladies and gentlemen, may I now invite Major General R.P.S. Bhadoria, VSM, Additional Director General, CLAWS, to please deliver the welcome remarks.
Thank you very much, ma'am. Honorable dignitaries, which includes a galaxy of the former army commanders, esteemed guests, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you. Now, on behalf of Lieutenant General Padam Singh Shekhawat, the GOC MB area, and also the Colonel of the Mechanized Infantry Regiment and Director General Claus, it's a matter of great honor for me to welcome General Vadva, the Chief of Staff of the Western Command, and Ambassador Javed Ashraf, our former ambassador to France and Monaco, and all our distinguished guests to this annual lecture held in the memory of our former Army Chief, General Sundarji, and today happens to be his birthday also. Now, a lot has been already said about General Sundarji, but I'm sure a lot more can be said about his contribution and what he did for our Indian Army. Now, we gather here today to honor not just a great strategist or a celebrated military leader, but a man of intellect, conviction, and boundless charm. General Sundarji was more than a military reformer. He was a force of nature, a scholar warrior whose presence commanded respect not by rank alone, but by sheer brilliance of thought and action. He was a thinker in a world of rigid traditions, a disruptor in profession bound by conventions. Though he began his journey in the infantry, his vision stretched far beyond its traditional boundaries. He understood that modern warfare demanded agility, innovation, and technological advancement. His ideas revolutionized the military planning, shifting focus towards mechanization, mobility, and firepower, the concepts that would shape India's defense strategies for generations to come. His intellect was sharp, his words carried weight, and his vision extended beyond his time. He had the professional clarity needed to lead the Indian Army and nimble thinking of Kautilya while formulating military strategies. His seminal work, Vision 2100, a strategy for the 21st century, exemplified his deep understanding of modern warfare and international relations. His theories addressed global power shifts, transition from traditional warfare to revolutions in military affairs, which were driven by, or which are being driven by, information technology and changes in the organizational structures. And he carried out many of them, because during those times we were preparing for the staff college, and it was difficult to keep pace with the kind of new organizations which were coming out every day. So General Sundarji's insights into the nuclear doctrine and warfare remain a guiding light in today's vulnerable, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world, often called as VUCA world, where the threat of conflict is ever present. Former National Security Advisor, Mr. Shiv Shankar Menon, has written in his book, The Choices, that discussions between General Sundarji and Raja Ramanna, the then chairman of India's Atomic Energy Commission, often centered on the future of India's nuclear weapons. Ramanna viewed nuclear arms more as a political and military leverage, an enabler and equalizer, rather than a tool of war. In contrast, for General Sundarji, the nuclear capability was means to counterbalance Chinese conventional superiority, potentially as a direct military tool. And we all in the armed forces know how correct he was then. When the news of Pokhran 2 reached him, his life's vision realized he could not speak. He was, in fact, admitted in RR hospital with a lot of complications. But he spoke in action, a firm grip, a bold thumbs up. Now, many of you will recall that when challenged over his bold moves in Sumrongchu in Arunachal Pradesh, and even being accused of being recklessness, he stood tall. He believed in preparation, in asserting strength before conflict could arise. His strategy of adopting forward posture on the line of actual control has stood us in great stead even today. General Sundarji was not just a man of war. Those who knew him have this to say, that he was a man of warmth, of wit, of camaraderie. Whether leading high-stakes military discussions, or engaging in lively debates with his colleagues, his presence was magnetic, leaving an impression not just through his intellect, but through his remarkable ability to connect with people. He may have left us, but his spirit, his fire, and even his numerous contributions remain with us. Today, the world faces great power competition and now tariff wars. And add to this a not so peaceful rise of People's Republic of China. All this has significantly altered the global power structure, challenging the established norms. While India is navigating a very challenging security and strategic environment, it is also being seen as a beacon of democracy and humanism, showing its capacity to influence global events while championing values of cooperation and understanding. The ancient Indian ideal of Vasudev Kutumbakam, that is, the world is one family, is a vision where security and peace go hand in hand across borders and beyond differences. India's ability to maintain diplomatic engagements across diverse global divides highlights its strategic autonomy. There is no denying the fact that we face numerous internal and external challenges, but these challenges are also intertwined with opportunities for India. Addressing national security challenges requires transformative approaches to modernize and strengthen defense capabilities, promoting self-reliance and fostering public-private partnership. We are fortunate to have Ambassador Javed Ashraf, who will further delve on safeguarding the future, the national security challenges on the road to Viksit Bharat. I thank you all once again for being here today to honor the memory of Jan Sundarji. May his legacy continue to inspire us to carry forward his vision with the same clarity of thought, strategic boldness, and unwavering commitment to the nation. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Bhadoria, for setting the stage with your warm words. We also have the honor of having with us today Lieutenant General Padam Singh Shekhawat, Param Vishisht Seva Medal, Ati Vishisht Seva Medal, Sena Medal, General Officer commanding Madhya Bharat area. The General Officer was commissioned into the 16th Mechanized Infantry in December 1987. An alumni of the National Defense Academy and the Indian Military Academy, he has completed the Defense Services Staff Course, Senior and Higher Command courses, and is also a graduate of the prestigious National Defense College in Dhaka, Bangladesh. With an illustrious career spanning high-profile command, staff, and instruction roles, he has led operations at some of the most critical junctures in recent history, including command of a mountain division in eastern Ladakh during the Galwan Valley face-off, as well as in the Kailash ranges. He has also commanded his battalion and an armored brigade and has held numerous senior appointments such as Director General Discipline, Ceremonial and Welfare at the Army Headquarters, Brigadier General Staff Operations at Southwestern Command, and Major General Administration in the Southern Command. His international service includes a tenure with the United Nations Interim Force in Lebanon, and he has served as an instructor at the National Defense Academy, Kharakwasla. General Shekhawat currently holds the esteemed position of Colonel of the Mechanized Infantry Regiment. Ladies and gentlemen, I now request Lieutenant General Padam Singh Shekhawat, PVSM, AVSM, SM, General Officer Commanding Madhya Bharat Area, to kindly deliver the keynote address.
First of all, I must tell you that I was not supposed to deliver the keynote address. It was a GOCNC Western Command, but due to prevailing situations and the commitments, the Army commanders of the Western Front have been called for a briefing at the Army headquarters. So I'm stepping in his place for this particular task. To start with, General Mohit Wadhwa, the Chief of Staff, Western Command, Ambassador Javed Ashraf, General Panag, General Shankar Ghosh, General Man, and the other present, the colonels of the regiments of the Mechanized Infantry and the Brigade of Guards, ladies and gentlemen. A very good morning, and today it's with the profound reverence that I stand here today to speak to you on the 5th General K. Sundarji Memorial Lecture. Today happens to be his birthday, though the film did mention 30th April, a mistake, but today is his birthday. This annual lecture transcends the role of mere commemorative event. It serves as a profound tribute to one of India's most illustrious and revered military leader, General Krishnaswamy Sundarji, a man whose legacy continues to illuminate our path as we navigate the intricate and the rapidly evolving global space. General K. Sundarji is widely recognized as a reformer and a visionary who endeavored to modernize India's defense forces and strategic thinking. He anticipated the intricate nature of contemporary warfare, technology-driven conflicts, and geopolitical challenges, and was a fervent advocate for equipping India for a more assertive position on the global stage. General Sundarji spearheaded transformative initiatives such as Operational Brass Tacks in 1986-87, a bold and a strategic exercise that showcased India's growing military prowess. Under his leadership, we also witnessed the expansion of Mechanized Infantry Regiment, transforming our armed forces into a more agile and a formidable force. But perhaps his most enduring contribution was advocacy for integrating advanced communications and control systems, enhancing Indian Army's ability to address the challenges of modern warfare. General Sundarji played a pivotal role in propelling the Indian Army towards modernization, towards mechanizations, towards rapidization of the infantry division, and technological advancements that we see today. He introduced the concepts of combined arms operations, integrating the infantry, the armored, and the artillery, a shift from the conventional rigid tactics followed earlier. He strongly believed that India must look beyond the immediate borders and play a role in a regional and global geopolitics. Even before India officially declared its nuclear weapon state in 1998, Sundarji had emphasized the importance of a credible nuclear deterrence for its national security. He held a firm belief that a robust, self-reliant India, a nation strategically secure, technologically advanced, and a socially inclusive nation. This vision, or as we call today's Viksit Bharat, envisions a nation that is not only economically prosperous and deeply rooted in security, resilience, and security and equity. Today's topic, the subject today, that is safeguarding the future national security challenges on the path to Viksit Bharat, holds even greater relevance in the context of evolving global geopolitics. The established world order appears to be shaken up. Existing international alignments are being scrutinized, and the new alliances are being forged as we speak today because of these situations. Amidst these transformations, national security remains a fundamental pillar for development and demands greater emphasis than ever before. Formulating and reviewing the national security for India is not only essential, but very and highly critical. The decisions we make today will determine the kind of nation we have tomorrow. As India confidently strides towards becoming a developed nation by 2047, the centenary of independence, it is imperative that we acknowledge that this trajectory, while brimming with opportunities, is also characterized by substantial complexities. Currently, India finds itself in a pivotal juncture. It navigates intricate alliances with competitive dynamics, while simultaneously being enveloped by increasingly and a volatile, disruptive neighborhood. As the chair of G20, India assumed a pivotal role on the global stage, emerging as a mediator in a divided world. We did not merely participate, we led the nations. This momentous occasion was not merely symbolic. It reflected India's evolving geopolitical identity, one rooted in a strategic autonomy and guided by strategic partnerships. We must maintain self-reliance while simultaneously engaging deeply with the entire world. Our defense diplomacy is delivering results, though through developing indigenous defense systems under Atmanirbhar Bharat, we are expanding our defense exports and establishing our prowess in defense production. It makes us self-reliant, it makes us more confident, and India must continue this momentum. Maritime space has emerged as the next strategic frontier. Approximately 95% of our trade by volume is conducted through the oceans, and 70% of energy imports are transit through the Indian Ocean region. Consequently, the Indo-Pacific has become a pivotal hub for India's security and economic future. However, this critical space faces mounting pressures due to the escalating geopolitical tensions and the expansion of its naval presence, especially by China. Now, the Chinese presence in Djibouti, Gwadar, Hambantota, as also its presence in Chittagong port in Bangladesh, and the naval exercise that it conducts with Pakistan Navy indicates its strategic intent to establish a naval presence in this region, commonly referred to be as a string of pearls. The deployment of naval militia and maritime research vessels further adds on to the volatility, uncertainty, and ambiguity in the maritime domain. In response to this, India has operationalized Mission Sagar to enhance cooperation and ensure regional stability. We have strengthened our engagements with the Quad, reinforcing shared commitments to a free and open Indo-Pacific. Simultaneously, we are investing in a robust blue water navy, equipping our navy with aircraft carriers and nuclear submarines to safeguard our maritime interest and project strengths in the critical spaces. However, China's presence from Galwan to the South China Sea and from cyberspace to satellites remains the most complex and a long-term challenge for India on all fronts. In 2024, China spent $224 billion annually on defense, while this is 3 times the annual defense budget of our country. It has restructured military, including the new Information Support Force, which evolves from the earlier Strategic Support Force, a model that fuses space, cyber, electronics, and psychological warfare. Therefore, it is imperative that India too study and adapt to this evolving structure. Along the line of actual control, the PLA is revolutionizing its strategic landscape by employing autonomous surveillance technologies, UAV swarms, and jamming capabilities. To maintain parity, India is also making significant strides in the northern borders. This includes deploying indigenous drones. We are constructing additional roads in the Vibrant Village program and bolstering our presence in the intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets. However, it is crucial to recognize that these reactionary measures are insufficient. To truly maintain control, India must proactively anticipate and counter China's evolving tactics. As far as Pakistan is concerned, our neighbor, it continues to pose an asymmetric and a persistent threat, despite its fragile economy and its focus on terrorism and proxy warfare has remained undiminished. General Asim Munir's recent intemperate and controversial statements on the revival of two nations has reignited a debate justifying the creation of India and Pakistan. This may serve as a means to address the issues that plague the Pakistan army and the country's relevance in particular. Their fixation on Kashmir remains central as publicly vocalized by its leadership, and that often to align the sentiments of its uneducated population. The Pahalgam massacre and is particularly significant in reviving the varying support of the Kashmiri and re-internationalizing the issue and re-hyphenating Indo-Pak. Additionally, the adjacent states like Punjab and Rajasthan have seen a near double rise in drone drops carrying weapons and narcotics. This isn't something we can take on lightly. India needs to act. It needs to act fast, and it needs to act with precision. This means boosting our defense preparedness and modernizing our defense forces. It also means ramping up counter-radicalization and its vulnerable border communities. It means building a strong psychological warfare capabilities to push back, push hard, and push against the extremist narratives at their very roots. Because terrorism doesn't respect borders, but neither will our resolve. In the words of Chanakya, a nation is not defeated unless it loses its courage. India has never lacked courage, and it never will. But in today's world, the courage must be armed with insight, driven by anticipation, and united by purpose. We are certain that the future actions that we take will be the best interests of our nation. The path to Viksit Bharat is not just about GDP figures or gleaming skylines. It's about sovereignty. It's about security. And above all, it's all about self-respect. Our talk today by Ambassador Javed Ashraf will explore practical and actionable steps for every stakeholder in India's stable security environment. And to succeed, we need a multi-dimensional strategy which integrates our military strength, our diplomatic engagements, and our technological innovations and civil-military cooperations. Taking inspiration from General Sundarji, his vision 2100, the way forward involves heavy investments in indigenous defense manufacturing, artificial intelligence in defense, cyber capabilities, and quantum technologies. It involves maintaining a robust and a credible nuclear posture and developing capabilities to deter both conventional and non-conventional threats. It involves bridging the gaps between the military, the economic, environmental, and cyber domains under cohesive national security strategy. It involves maintaining a robust and a credible nuclear posture and developing capabilities to deter both conventional and non-conventional threats. It involves proactive leadership in the South Asia and Indo-Pacific region through diplomacy, through economic ties and security partnerships, that is the Quad and the IOR region. It involves better integration of civil and technology industries, startups, and military needs for innovations-driven security solutions. It involves speeding up connectivity projects, the roads, rails, and air bases along the sensitive borders, especially vis-à-vis China. And also it involves building a social cohesion, combating disinformation, and ensuring internal stability against the hybrid threats. The journey to Viksit Bharat is a shared endeavor. It calls on the Indian Army to be more than just a fighting force, to be ambassadors of India's values, partners in the development and sentinels of its future. General Sundarji showed us what vision, courage, and capability looks in uniform. As we honor his legacy today, let us pledge to take forward those same qualities. Let us come together to safeguard our future with stronger borders, with sharper minds, with secure technologies, and with shared national mission. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Thank you, General Shekhawat, for your thought-provoking words. Ladies and gentlemen, we now move to the heart of today's deliberations, our keynote lecture, titled Safeguarding the Future, National Security Challenges to the Path to Viksit Bharat. We are deeply honored to welcome Ambassador Javed Ashraf, a distinguished career diplomat and former Indian ambassador to France and Monaco, to deliver the main lecture for today's session. Ambassador Ashraf is an alumni of St. Stephen's College, University of Delhi, and holds a master in management from Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. He brings with him a wealth of experience in foreign policy, diplomacy, and national security. Over the course of his illustrious career, he served India with distinction in a range of high-level diplomatic roles. Most recently, as ambassador to France and Monaco from 2020 to 2024, and prior to that, as High Commissioner to Singapore. His overseas assignments also included postings in Washington, Germany, and Nepal, where he played key roles in advancing India's strategic and bilateral relationships. He held senior positions in the Ministry of External Affairs, including as Joint Secretary in the Americas Division, and later in the Prime Minister's office, both under Dr. Manmohan Singh and Shri Narendra Modi, with responsibilities spanning foreign policy, defense, national security, space, atomic energy, and speech writing. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege to now invite the ambassador to kindly take the stage and lead us through this pivotal session.
Good morning. General Shekhawat, thank you for your outstanding and excellent overview of this theme today. I think I could simply conclude by saying I endorse everything you say and cut this short. General Bhaduria, thank you for your very, very kind introduction, and I think together with the film, it reminded us of the extraordinary contribution that General K. Sundarji made, not just to the Army, but overall to the national security thinking and planning for India, which has stood us well in these times. Thank you really for the honor of inviting me to deliver this address. I am not sure whether I was really deserving of this, but it's a great pleasure to be here, although we meet here in the shadow of great gloom and grief, but also of rage and resolve over this horrendous, horrific massacre in Pahalgam. It shows us that even as we grapple with the era-defining geopolitical changes taking place in the world, we in India are still dealing with the persistence of traditional challenges and security risks that we have been facing for decades. It's a great honor also to be here in a Western Command. It really is a beautiful campus. Thank you for this great hospitality last evening. I mean, this is a command where legendary acts and accomplishments have been written into the history of modern India, and it's a command that has produced some of the greatest military leaders of our times. I'd also like to particularly thank, and I'm really honored to see so many retired generals over here, legends in their own right, people who have been admired greatly for the contributions they've made to India's national security. But even after they have, so to speak, hung up their uniform, they continue, and many of you are read so avidly, listened to so clearly by not just policymakers, but also by general public about all these issues that concern our national security and defense. I'd also like to pay a special word of tribute to the spouses who are present here, because in life's journey you bear more than your general share of risks, but few do it with the kind of courage, grace, and generosity that you do. In your own ways, you have been great leaders of the family of the Indian Armed Forces. I'm particularly also happy to be here amidst men of the land forces, as we call them, the Army, because of all the three wings of the armed forces and of all our national security establishments, you are the ones who serve in the harshest conditions imaginable in the world. From the most inhospitable heights of Siachen to the blistering cold of the eastern Ladakh, to those awful heat in the deserts on the Western Front, to the jungles, And very often you move from one extraordinarily difficult condition to another. The price you sometimes pay in terms of separation from your families for years takes a heavy toll. I often used to tell my military attaches in Paris that make the most of it while you are still here for the 3 years. Enjoy the time that you can with your families, because it's not something that what others take for granted is not something that you can actually take for granted. So it's real pleasure and privilege to be here today. And it also reminds me that over the past decade, there have been many armchair analysts and commentators who have spoken about the irrelevance or the diminishing role of land forces in the age of technology and wars that are persecuted from 30,000 feet. But I think that the Ukraine war, as also the new ambitions of great powers for expansion and territorial acquisitions, have once again emphasized that there are no substitutes for boots on the ground. And in Europe, where I last served, I think they have recognized that after the post-Cold War belief that all wars that they will fight will be fought in distant lands from ships and from fighter jets, that thought has been quickly replaced by a sense of urgency of rebuilding their land forces. And they look to us very often because of the sheer extraordinary scale, the complexity of our organization. But it is also a time of great geopolitical shifts, changing character of the economy, technological disruptions on a daily basis, threats in new domain. Wherever human activities migrate, threats and conflicts also migrate into that. So innovation in military has become a key issue for everyone. And therefore it is particularly relevant that we are speaking about it today on the birthday of a great general. Now, unlike us civilians who by our very entitlement rise to positions equivalent to 3 stars as a matter of journey over a number of years, for military officers, it is something that they earn, the ranks that they pick up, that the stars that they wear comes through a lot of hard work, sometimes through very painful process of attrition of some of the most outstanding officers. And it requires a great intellectual, human, and professional skills to be able to rise to the top. So we have generations and generations of very, very outstanding military leaders. But I think it would be fair to say that even among that pantheon of great leaders, General Sundarji stands as among the tallest. We've already heard about all that is of his achievements. But think back to that 1980s. The Cold War had come to our doorsteps in the war in Afghanistan. Pakistan was redefining its identity after General Ziaul Haq became the president, trying to reduce and minimize the South Asian part and enhance and emphasize the Islamist identity of Pakistan. It was also the time when Pakistan actually incorporated cross-border terrorism as an essential instrument of its political military strategy. To the north, we had a hardening of position of China with regard to the boundary question starting sometime in the mid-1980s. Our long-standing major power ally, Russia, then Soviet Union, was itself seeing a different era now. It was seeing the pressure of its Cold War with the United States, and we could see already by the 1980s the writing on the wall about the future of the Soviet Union. In the meantime, with the United States using Pakistan as a base, our own relations with the United States, despite the efforts that the then leadership made, could not change much. And that relationship continued to be bedeviled by the exigencies of the Cold War at that point of time. So General Sundarji led in an era of great challenges for India. And we've already seen of some of the most memorable operations, some of the doctrinal changes that he brought about, some of the restructuring that he introduced into the military. From a civilian perspective, I'd like to point out two things. One is that he did not only give a new shape, direction to the Indian military, but he also made an Indian military not just as a force of defense of the borders, but as an essential and indispensable instrument of Indian power. And that's a big transformation that we saw during his era. The second is with regards to the nuclear doctrine. From 1960s, 70s, we've been a reluctant nuclear power, a hesitant nuclear power. We saw it always as something that was not necessarily required at the political leadership level. Even the journey from 74 to 1998 took very, very long. But to be able at that point of time to conceive of a nuclear doctrine, of what it should be, and how in a spectrum of conventional, unconventional, and strategic warfare, a nuclear doctrine fits in our environment, where we had two neighbors. One was already a nuclear weapons power, the other was in the process in the 1980s of becoming one. It was an extraordinary contribution because, for one thing, it highlighted that we were a country that could act with a great sense of responsibility with the greatest source of power that a nation can build. As you are aware, that clarity of our nuclear doctrine has been appreciated by everyone. But more than anything else, it has helped us plan our entire structure, the civil-military relationship therein, our force posture, our response systems, our command and control, in a way that would not have been possible without the clarity of developing a nuclear doctrine. So it is with this background that today, when we are once again in an era that is changing and that comes maybe once in a century or more, that we need to reflect upon how India's own transformation in a rapidly changing world links with its national security challenges. We've heard about, of course, of Viksit Bharat today. It's an aspirational goal that we wish to achieve in 2047. You've already heard General Shekhawat say that it is not just simply about the aggregates, the metrics of numbers, the rate of growth, but that it is also about the quality of life, the inclusion, that it isn't restricted or driven by 10% of the population, but draws the entire 1.4 billion people into its participation and in its opportunities. And that it is about ease of living, ease of livelihood, ease of generating wealth and prosperity in society, the structure of our social and physical infrastructure, the structure and sophistication of our economy, our leadership in research, education, innovation, our capacity to be Atmanirbhar not as a self-contained country, but as a self-reliant, self-generating, and self-sustaining nation. And all of this has an external dimension. We need to create an external environment that is conducive to our growth and to our transformation. Naturally, we need a peaceful and secure periphery and an extended neighborhood. We need a stable and predictable international system and international order that enables us to make our choices more clearly. And we need access to markets, technology, critical minerals, energy, finances, and skills. And a Viksit Bharat needs to be a secure Bharat. I mean, that is something without which we simply cannot achieve our objectives. And so when we look at our external environment and our internal challenges, we are perhaps uniquely placed in the world where we are simultaneously dealing with what we are familiar with and at the same time with this extraordinary change that is sweeping through the world. We've already heard a lot about China. Let me start with Pakistan. I think all of us are familiar with the challenges that emanate from Pakistan. And it is remarkable that it simultaneously exists at three levels. At the level of cross-border terrorism, conventional threat, and at the strategic level from a nuclear perspective. And it is a country which remains firmly in the grip of its military. Pakistan's trajectory is moving in exactly the opposite direction to our trajectory. China perhaps remains its only external lifeline at the moment. But a weakened, isolated Pakistan with a military under stress because of its internal challenges from Balochistan to its failure to achieve strategic depth in Afghanistan, to its inability to mollify and pacify the civilian leaderships of the country, will always lead it to externalize its challenges. What it does is that it again reminds the people of Pakistan that Pakistan faces an existential threat from India, and the only institution that can guard it, safeguard Pakistan, is the institution of the military. And at the same time, each time it feels that no one in the world remembers it, it seeks to internationalize a conflict with India and re-internationalize the Kashmir issue. However, the context in which it is operating now is radically different from the time when it enjoyed a much higher degree of strategic leverage, particularly with regard to the Cold War and then after that the Afghan War. But we have witnessed that in this regular, monotonous pattern of cross-border terrorism, every 3 to 4 years we experience something that is so large, so visible, so painful, that it compels us to react in a major way. But for us, the challenge is that we do take a set of diplomatic measures each time, downgrading the relationship, sometimes downgrading an already downgraded relationship. We switch off on commercial ties, people-to-people ties, and since 2014, we have changed the playbook and gone against the anticipated and war-gamed responses from India. But the dilemma for us in the future would be, as it is for counterinsurgency operations anywhere in the world, from Sahel to the Middle East to Afghanistan, even to the Southeast Asian countries, is what exactly is the solution to a problem of this nature, particularly when it has the backing of a state like Pakistan. And this is a dilemma which we will have to deal with. But it can only be dealt with when the world is able to genuinely come together to reduce the salience of Pakistan in the polity of military in the polity of Pakistan, and give the civilian leadership genuine authority and strength and confidence that it can pursue independent policy. That has to be the starting point. With China, I think we have to recognize a big reality. For the first time in our independent history, we now have an adversary as a neighbor that is also a major power in the world. Not just in the terms of the size of its economy, but also in terms of its technological sophistication and in an exceptionally unprecedented increase in its militarization. For us, the challenge is not simply along the boundary or the border region. The challenge is in our neighborhood. It is also in China's consistent effort to block the accommodation of India in the global architecture of governance, security, economy. And it has a very, very important impact on our immediate neighborhood. Its ability, with its resources, to take advantage of political turbulence in our neighborhood, weak political institutions, together with plurality of political actors, means that it is able to influence choices in our own neighborhood. And what that has done is that because South Asia is no longer our backyard, and China is increasingly present here, it has also brought the United States into a more active role in South Asia, sometimes not necessarily to our benefit. And as a country, the largest player, we should be able to control the destiny, or at least have the major influence in our own region, and not to see the region becoming a theater of a major power competition again. And as you've just heard, we can no longer also be sanguine about our maritime neighborhood. For a long time, due to historical reasons, we've focused much more on our continental challenges. It was in 2015, March 12, that Prime Minister Narendra Modi articulated for the first time a maritime vision for India through Sagar, security and growth for all in the region. We chose Mauritius, particularly the port with the Barracuda and our own destroyer in the background, with the Indian Ocean behind us, as a deliberate backdrop for a speech. And it is a dual challenge for us, because the advantage that we may have had vis-à-vis China in the maritime domain, particularly with regard to its supply chain, may be nullified, because we do have challenges on our continental or land border side, partly because of our geography. And when you look further east, Southeast Asia is a very important region for us, for a number of reasons. But of course, our maritime challenge from China, that is the first line of defense we must have. And that is why relations with Philippines, with Singapore, with Indonesia, with Vietnam are critically important. In my time in Singapore, we were able to fly sorties over South China Sea using P-8Is, not just from the base in Andaman, but also from Southeast Asia, which gave us greater staying power, opportunity to refuel and then fly again. And so for us, building relationships with Southeast Asia is very important, geopolitically, as a pivotal region in the Indo-Pacific, but also for our security challenges. Similarly, to our west, I hardly need to emphasize the national security importance of the Gulf region. Anything that happens there can have very serious consequences for our energy security, for our people, for our trade, and for our general conventional security. But one of the things that has happened as a result of China's rise, that it has actually engendered the revival of the idea of Indo-Pacific. For a long time, we spoke of Asia-Pacific, we spoke of a hyphenated Asia, Indian Ocean, and Pacific Ocean regions. And it is China's two-ocean strategy that also, in some sense, engendered the rise of Indo-Pacific. And what we are doing to address that challenge is by building a network of relationships, bilateral and minilaterals, in order to address our security and economic challenges, but also challenge of influence. Of all of those relationships that we've built, we've got, of course, France, we've got Indonesia, we are building with Australia and Japan separately. Quad has been the most important instrument of our engagement in the Indo-Pacific region. And Quad has gained acceptance, and it has delivered on many fronts. But I think we should also be conscious of the limitations of Quad. For one, it includes 3 members that are treaty-based military allies. They are principally Pacific-oriented, while we are principally Indian Ocean-oriented. The Australians will tell you that they also have an Indian Ocean face, but I think they're largely based in the Pacific orientation, and certainly AUKUS will confine them even more to the Pacific. Second, our interests are convergent but not identical. For the United States, for example, it is really a question of who will be the global hegemon in the 21st century. For us, we have real problems with China. And the United States knows that unlike in the game of tennis, where you can regain your #1 ranking, in the world of geopolitics, it's once you lose your #1 ranking, it is very hard to regain it. And for us, the non-security dimensions are as important as the security dimension. Because what matters is what we do with each other, what we do for each other, and what we do for others in the region. Because part of the challenge of Indo-Pacific is the contest of influence, not simply of security. And this is where the China-US geopolitical competition is shaping up. And if the United States decides to strip its external strategy of some of the instruments of soft power, since we call it, there are 3 instruments of power: the coercive power, the incentivizing power, and the inspiring power. If it strips its policies of the inspirational and the inspiring power, it will be diluting the salience of Quad. What we are seeing is that administration. That is, does he want to make America great again, or does he want China to be a peer competitor? And will he use both instruments that Biden administration used, which is direct containment and building an informal alliance of powers, in which it did go to some lengths to accommodate, without reciprocity, the interests of its key partners? And that's a big difference. Because we do not know whether that is exactly going to be the case with President Trump. And that he may actually want to deal with China directly, may still want to invest in us, but in a more transactional, more balance of trade terms. And it is also possible that he may wish to achieve some sort of a deal with China, something that enables him to project to his audience that his strategy has enabled United States to overcome the economic depredation that China has practiced for 3 decades on the United States. In any case, his disregard for international principles, his disregard, his reciprocal tariffs, his respect for strength, and his disregard, in some sense, also for some of the interests of his allies, and his own proclivity towards territorial expansion sends a signal to the region as well. And it isn't what in United States and India do together. And I say this because much of the discourse in the Indian media is about India and the United States doing something together. It is also what he does with the rest of the world, and particularly the Indo-Pacific region, that will have an impact on us, because it will have a direct impact on China's role and influence in the region, notwithstanding the wariness. So what you will see is some degree of accommodation of even countries like China and Korea towards China. You will see definitely countries in the region, particularly middle powers, wanting to do more together. Definitely increased militarization. The prospects, however remote it may seem, of Japan and Korea becoming nuclear weapons power. Now, both have the capacity to be one. And at this point of time, if you are not certain about the nuclear guarantees of the United States, the extended deterrence, then there may be choices, and there are already debates in these two countries, however muted and sacrilegious it might seem for the time being. And it could also lead to reordering of trade, energy, and digital partnerships, hedging on currency, and from China plus one, the United States plus one, a strategy for a large number of countries. I say this because the other side of the efforts that we are making to continue to build relations with the United States needs to be also put into perspective, at least for our national security planners. But all this is also part of great geopolitical shifts. Now, the international order was never liberal, was never stable, and was certainly not to our interest. But it gave us a framework in which to operate. We see that changing now. We can say with certainty that the old order has collapsed. But it precedes Trump. It precedes President Trump. Crisis actually accelerates the trends, and it telescopes the future into the present. So whether it was the COVID, the Ukraine war, the supply chain concentration, the globalization and its discontent, the migrations, the cultural issues, the identity issues, all of that has brought about a big change. For the United States, it no longer finds the architecture that it built either attractive or useful. In any case, the West itself is no longer that homogeneous as we had imagined it, as it once used to be. The United States is no longer, and it started, by the way, with President Obama. President Biden was a bit of an outlier because he grew up most of his time during the Cold War. The United States is no longer willing or able to underwrite the international system. China is not logically going to take its place. China's approach to the world will not necessarily, or its path to global position will not necessarily follow the playbook of the United States. Russia has been badly hurt, but it has a lot of resources, but remember, technologically, it is falling behind, particularly in technologies of the 21st century. Its planes were not using glasnost, they were using GPS devices rather than their own for security. Europe is facing strategic irrelevance and, in a sense, loss of economic competitiveness. You're seeing countries, what I call the corridor of middle powers: Australia, Indonesia, India, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Turkey, and even France and Italy, and now Germany, UK. These are countries that are now trying to leverage different relationships and partnerships to assert themselves more forcefully on the global stage. Just look at the way Saudi Arabia has positioned itself in the global order. So we're looking at a multipolar world without necessarily the discipline of multilateralism, and People ask this question, are we returning to the era of spheres of influence? I think we were already, always in era of spheres of influence. It is economic, security, and prestige logic which dictate it. And if that were to be the case with countries of multiple systems coexisting, cooperating, competing, sometimes colliding, it introduces a great deal of uncertainty into our own security calculus. That's the geopolitical side of it. I'm taking a little bit of time. Let me just get through with this. I'm keeping an eye on the clock for the military style bit. There is, of course, the new domains of challenges, and which all of you are familiar with, from cyber to underwater, to seabed, to space, and to society. Because the information, disinformation campaign can actually cause great havoc in our societies. It's the first line of, I think, offense at the moment. But think of it this way, that who would have thought that the conflict would migrate to the seabed as well. And it isn't just about cables, sea cables, cutting off sea cables, or the highways of the future. It is also about putting sensors which enable us to track strategic submarines. It is also, in the space domain, I actually have seen exercises in France, Asterix, where they do extraordinary simulations of simply taking a satellite out of its orbit in an evasive action can actually kill the life of a satellite by half because of the energy that is consumed. Forget about spoofing, forget about taking control of it, or simply kinetic destruction of it, which is so. And more our lives are so dependent on it. And you see the other side. In the case of Ukraine war, every person in Ukraine became an intelligence officer because they could use the phone to take pictures of Russian position, uplink it to Starlink, and there was the response right away. Who would have thought 20 years ago that we would be fighting a war in this fashion? But we're also entering the age of artificial intelligence. Every era, technology has been a determinant of power, economic strength, military strength, and therefore of political strength, but also, therefore, of the prominence of the values that that particular society represent. And we are now at the cusp of the AI age. We are still not yet sure what are the use cases, how it will move, but it will be for us a temptation to get into the race for the largest language models. Either we get into that, or we get into trying to actually see how we use our data, how we use our GPU processing capacity, and use our skills to develop the right kinds of applications and use cases, both in the economic and the security domain. And of course, then we have those issues, which is critical minerals, energy, technology, and manufacturing supply chain. Those will be absolutely vital for our security and for our achieving Viksit Bharat. Now, we depend so much on 80–85% for our energy imports. We cannot simply rely on solar and wind, because if that were the case, we'll have to look up to the nature every day to say if our economy is going to run or no on that particular day. So we are now talking about nuclear energy once again, mercifully, both in terms of large reactors and small reactors, and it's also about strategic autonomy, it's about sovereignty, it's about independence, it's about self-reliance, and not just a short energy supply. And how we position ourselves to be part of the global supply chain is a big challenge that we are facing at this point of time. So it is a combination of so many different variables that are at play. While I've pointed out some of the challenges that we face, I think we should also take credit for the way we are navigating through this extraordinarily complex world. We are one of the few countries that have been able to deal with the volatility and of the US electoral outcomes in a way to derive maximum benefit for it. It's a mature, balanced approach to finding the best way forward to deal with the United States, in particular to harness this for our capacity building in technology, in supply chain, in semiconductors, and in clean energy. In the same way, we have kept open our relations with Russia, and I think this has been one of the great examples of how we have withstood international pressure and continue to deal with Russia to the best advantage. We will at some point also have to find a way to a modus vivendi to work with China despite all the challenges we have. Perhaps China's own pressure and internal preoccupations may make them more amenable. Because the supply chain issues that we are talking about intrinsically get linked to China. And we need to release some of that pressure along the border for us to be able to deal with it. And I think as two mature countries, we managed to be firm, but also be able to maintain dialogue. There is a lesson in it for us of the path forward. With Europe, and I think there's enormous opportunity. As I said, Europe is facing strategic irrelevance. It is lost one pillar of energy with Russia. It is losing the security umbrella of the United States, and it is losing the market of China. And we need to take advantage of it, because Europe has wonderful technologies, great capabilities. They're also standard setters, and 1.4 billion people and 600 million people can come together and do some things. Now, we don't simply have to work with the European Union, which can be so cumbersome that it can make our bureaucracy look almost entrepreneurial. So we have countries. With France, where I have served, I think we have an extraordinary strategic partnership. There is nothing so sensitive or so difficult that France and India today are not prepared to do with each other. All of you know the most sensitive domains of defense and security. India and France are prepared to work together. But we see that now with Germany also, a country that is belatedly realizing that complacency of having put all its choices in someone else's hands. So this is a great opportunity for us. But I think we have to focus a lot on our extended maritime and continental neighborhood, because we simply cannot be dependent on others to provide the ambience of security or a framework of security for us to operate. Southwest Indian Ocean region, the eastern seaboard of Africa, the Horn of Africa, the Gulf region, South Asia, Southeast Asia, all the way to the southeastern Indian Ocean, that has to get a lot of priority from us. And that is something that we are doing, but I believe that we need to do a lot more in order to achieve this. And we have to make with the major powers of the world, we have to make access to technology from defense to energy, to semiconductors, to dual-use technologies, to critical minerals as a principal objective of our foreign policy. That is something not simply about minilaterals, not simply about how we sit together around the high table, but about these concrete outcomes. Having said about things externally, let me turn to our internal issues. And I'll complete with that. For us, I think a country of 1.4 billion people living in great diversity, I think internal cohesion is the greatest source of strength. And to me, our military, our armed forces, is the greatest symbol and the greatest embodiment of that. An institution that reflects India's regional, linguistic, cultural, religious diversity, but also the strength of our unity. And our position in the world has been shaped not simply by our economic strength, our technological achievements, our journey into space, but also about the values we represent. The soft power that we think in terms of culture is actually the soft power of values, the inspirational power that we have always represented, that enables us to exercise influence far beyond our strength. So that is always going to be a key objective and a key priority for us. But as we grow towards a Viksit Bharat, naturally our economy may be about 10 times, 9 times larger than what we are today, maybe 35 trillion. Hopefully our national security budget will grow. It's not simply in terms of current percentages, which I think are pretty low, but also not simply in terms of numbers, just because our economy is growing, but also as a percentage of our GDP. I think it must have a target of 2.5%. And I have a thought, and I have a view, that the defense budget is not the same thing as the budget of the Ministry of Defense. We must be able to differentiate between the two. And the reason I say this is because part of the challenge is about, this, and I was one of those great champions of this OROP, is about the pensions that get added onto to the budget. We need to have a very clear idea about what is our capital budget, what is our revenue budget that actually goes into defense. That's one part of it. The second is that we must have at least one integrated national security budget, because we have budgets for our intelligence units, technical intelligence, human intelligence. We have budgets for our internal security agencies, for our paramilitary forces. And all of that needs to, in some sense, be properly reflected, because there are complementarities, and there are synergies, and there are roles that we play. And that kind of synergy needs to be done. My second expectation, your second expectation, is that as we become Viksit Bharat, our general level of skills and productivity of our people will grow, that we will become a leader in research, technology, and innovation, and that there will be something which is important in society, what I call the general diffusion of technology. It is about how everything we do is permeated by the use of modern technology and how that links up with skills and productivity. That will have an impact on our defense as well and national security. Similarly, if we invest in the right technologies, the right capabilities in the defense, it will have a salutary and a significant impact on our efforts for Viksit Bharat. We've seen that in the United States. We've seen that in many countries. There are technologies that were developed for defense. For example, advanced materials that go into, let's say, aircraft engine in the hot sections. That'll have applications in so many different domains. So this is something which is a mutually reinforcing. So these two premises are my expectations for national security. But let me turn to some of my own experiences, which have been both a source of frustration and I think a source of frustration for you. One is, of course, we speak about our forces handling, our national security establishment handling perhaps the world's most uniquely challenging security environment. We need to equip them. We need to be sure that they have the best possible equipment, adequate equipment to be able to perform their tasks. You cannot expect them to do that with their hands tied. But I find that we really do need to have not just a tinkering, but a radical reforms in our institutional structures, policies, and procedures. All of us are familiar with these extraordinary delays, protracted, tedious, cumbersome, complex procurement processes, during which some of you graduate from major to generals, while still pursuing the same files. And it has many, and sometimes when we not only create capability gaps, but when we do have the equipment, they may already, the QRs are fixed, so they may already be a bit obsolete by the time they are inducted, or certainly may find it behind what others have. This is a serious challenge, and it affects all three wings of the armed forces. Part of the problem is the lack of competence in the Ministry of Defense, but also a part of the problem is the lack of competence in the armed forces. There is a frequent rotation of officers handling acquisition. Each comes with its own ideas. There is sometimes a big backlog. And I have dealt with many of these situations. Lack of long-term permanent cadres focused on technologies, focused on understanding the complexities. And today I think there are too many poles also and too many verticals in the decision-making process. And that is something which also I have tried to express views on, including taking inspiration from how the French system is structured. And therefore, this is also a problem which stems from DRDO's near veto and sometimes primacy on R&D. And this is a complex problem which we still haven't been, we are trying to resolve it, but it hasn't yet fully succeeded. And that brings us to a problem which we all understand, which is the problem of of defense equipment, indigenous defense industry. What I think is we have done a lot of good things in the last 10 years, including what the Prime Minister has said about Atmanirbharta, the mandatory procurement from India, the mandatory list from India, the corporatization of the Ordnance Factory Board, the role of private sector, the focus on startups, etc. But I think we still continue to put unrealistic and unsustainable, unattainable timelines on our products, on the maturation of our particular development project. It cuts across everything. And what that does is that our decisions are based on certain timelines projected by our research and development and our defense production units. And that means that the Air Force or the Navy or the Army cannot open its mouth. If it does, then it is accused of being too much in favor of buying from abroad. The defense, 80% of course are of made by defense, DPSUs, Defense Public Sector Units. There has been some changes, but I still feel, having dealt with them, that there are strong human resource constraints. There are great constraints of absorption of technology, of development of technology, accountability, and also of incentives and disincentives to deliver. We have, of course, the private sector, which is yet to have the capacity or the confidence that it will get a level playing field. We need to invest a lot more in failures, because innovation proceeds from the premise that there has to be failure also. And therefore, I believe very strongly in not just in legacy companies, but also in startups, because they are irreverent, they're ambitious, they're fearless, and they have hunger in their belly to produce and to do things. And I think the world over, we have to find the right combination of encouraging startups and marrying them with larger companies that can achieve those engineering excellence which is required for defense equipment. For foreign acquisitions, I think we have to make a very simple line. Everything has to be made here, and we need to be able to acquire on scale. And here is something that I have a very strong belief in. We need to have manufacturing TOT. It is not enough to simply say, oh, we'll get manufacturing TOT. That is technology crutch. You will keep going back to the same manufacturer to get new and upgraded technology. What you need is to sit with them, to learn to design, develop, to go through testing, qualification, materials, certification, in order to be able to do this on your own in the future and become self-reliant, like ISRO did with the Vikas engine, working with Safran in the 1970s in France. And that is how they are able to achieve that. Too often, we take the easy route of being just built to print, manufacturing TOT. It gives the impression of being self-reliant, but we are not. And so this is a very important change that we have to bring about. I would also say that we do need some changes in the civil military, the military reforms. And I say this because military must also be capable of fresh and innovative thinking. We have just seen General Sundarji's history. And that is important, that it comes from within. It isn't something that needs to be imposed from the top. We hear a lot about, of course, changes have taken place. We've got the Department of Military Affairs, the Office of the CDS, a great debate around jointness, around now theaterization. It's something for you all to debate, whether we have fronts or we have theaters and whether we have the resources to do that. But a lot of this must come from within. But if you don't do it, the others will take that on responsibility. Structures of cyber, structures for space need to be advanced. And when I was doing some of the national security review, and when I was looking at once, for example, the Naresh Chandra Committee report, the hardest ones to deal with were those pertaining to the Ministry of Defense and the armed forces. That also has to change, just as we in civil have to change our attitude. And I think that is a very important point as we look to build the forces of the future. How do we integrate technology, AI, data, sensor fusion? How do we make our forces more mobile? How do we operate in remote areas, in distant lands, if we have to, as our interests and as our people have developed global footprint? And how do we develop the capacity to revise our thinking and revise our plans? And in many instances, I've seen that we remain locked with the plans that we may have developed in the past. I don't want to single out, I know quite a few where it has not been possible to change with time. We have to think not in terms of equipment, but solutions for the future. It is not the platforms, but the solutions. What are the various alternatives that we need in order to be able to get there? And we do need to develop a more permanent cadre of technology experts. Similarly, on the civilian side, we need to change our attitude. I think there is a lot of reasons why the civil-military relations isn't as desirable as it should be. Part of it is a colonial thing where the military was kept in the barracks for reasons we know well. Part of it is the fear of an independent India about the future of democracy in the large military. But I think some of it is attitudes that have persisted from down the line. I have personally experienced that I think our approach to the military is not as positive from the civilian side as it should be. And that needs to change. We need to involve them more right in the decision-making processes, in planning, in listening to them. That is something that is going to be particularly important when we speak of civil-military fusion. Because in new domains of warfare, whether it is cyber, whether it is intelligence, whether it is technology, whether it is space, whether it is information, we will need that kind of civil-military fusion going forward. And I think one of the areas where I really wish we had do a lot more is to get the military to engage with elected representatives at the center in the state. I don't think there is enough understanding of what the military actually experiences, except through the filter of the civilian bureaucracy. And very often, I don't know why our system is so structured that the civilian bureaucratic leadership can have people who have never served in the defense area ever before. So this interaction is very important as we go forward. And I think the last 2 points I'd like to make, and I know some of you will be getting restive, is about defense and diplomacy. I think they are inseparable twins. Our journey to Viksit Bharat, our place in the world, will depend on how we integrate defense and diplomacy. Whether it is exercises, intelligence, information sharing, capacity building, equipment, bases, HADR, whether it is pulling people out of conflict, there is an absolutely inseparable link between defense and diplomacy. And every time our forces have gone abroad, either for exercises or for the HADR or for rescuing people from a conflict, they have been the greatest ambassadors of India's professional capabilities and India's values. People have always admired the professionalism, the role that the Indian military places. And that has a very different, very positive impact on the vision of India, on the image of India, on the perception of India as a responsible global power. But I'm sorry to say that we're actually not expanding DAs abroad. And I've had the experience of actually seeing a DAs being, in a sense, pulled out of one mission in order to fill up a place in another mission. I don't think in the overall scheme of things, I in Paris experienced this, I lost the position of Deputy Air Attaché in a country that is one of our strongest partners in aviation, military aviation, because they needed to locate a position in another mission. I think we can do better than that. I think I have gained enormously from the DAs that I have worked with. First, I learned a lot about defense. And second, I thought they were great in terms of information, in terms of projection. Today, when we have the situation as we do, you need the DAs to explain it in the language of the military forces or what we are experiencing. We don't have that, and we need to grow that. And why we are not able to do that, MEA also needs to, Ministry of External Affairs needs to integrate national security into its thinking in a very, very deep way. The last Heads of Mission conference that took place in 2022 did not have one session on defense. We did not invite anyone from the defense establishment, from our military leadership to speak about, from our Navy, from our Air Force, from our Army. That is not acceptable. And that we are not doing service to our military, our national interest. Similarly, for the Combined Commanders Conference, we need to see that we cannot keep national security confined to top secret files and within the confines of highly guarded rooms. We need much more engagement with our civilian bureaucracy, with our political leadership. So Combined Commanders Conference must simply not be of people wearing uniform and civilian leadership in the defense ministry, but also bring in others who can come in. And that brings me to a last point, which is the deterrence. I think that we are going to see a much higher level of nuclear renaissance, a return, as the global order starts crumbling. We need to be sure at every stage that it isn't just about the capabilities, but also about being assured that our signaling, that our command and control, that our communication systems, that our response mechanisms, that our systems are working. This is a force that will hopefully never, ever be called to operate. A submarine, an SSBN, hopefully will never get a command in its life. A man sitting in a nuclear command post hopefully will never get to command. But that officer needs to be absolutely on the top of the game every day. That's a huge thing. And so it is really about not reviewing this on a regular institutional basis. It's not an instrument of war as far as India is concerned. It is a political instrument. It is something that is a guarantor of the survival of the Indian state. It is the guarantor of our strategic autonomy and of our sovereignty, and that must continue. So finally, it all boils down to the mindset. Do we have the national will? Do we have the mindset, and do we cultivate it, not just in our military, but in every section of our society to be ready for that? Are we capable of devoting resources to doing our own research, our own understanding of the world and of the national security challenges, not simply reading from this wonderful plethora of reports that come out of the United States and elsewhere? This is very important. We need to devote resources to developing our own doctrines, understanding our own scholarship, and our own vocabulary for this. And finally, what I'd like to say is that when we think of Viksit Bharat, much of the debate is around economic policies. But it must equally be about national security policies, national security strategies, because the two are closely interlinked. And as I said, a Viksit Bharat is not attainable without a secure, safe, stable Bharat. And that responsibility, all of you bear with such wonderful courage, professionalism, idealism, struggles, and sacrifice. The nation owes you a great deal of gratitude for what you do. So thank you very much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Ashraf, for such a compelling, thoughtful, insightful, and forward-thinking address. We now open the floor to questions. I request all those who like to pose a question to please raise your hands. Our volunteers will assist you with microphones.
Thank you, Mr. Ashraf, for a very lucid description of our national security challenges. It was wonderful hearing you about talking about our extended neighborhood, far-off nations, United States, and all. What worries me most, and what I look at are the biggest challenge to our nation's security and to obtain that mission of Viksit Bharat is that over the years, and I'm not saying, I would rather say a couple of decades, we are not becoming a more cohesive nation internally. So you did mention, but you just skipped over it. The biggest national security challenge remains for us, for each Indian to feel that, yes, this is our nation and I'm an Indian, and to have that cohesive strength, which is lacking. We are not spending enough on education. We are not spending enough on innovation. We are not spending enough on skill development. And therefore, in absence of a cohesive nation, which is not well educated, which is not skilled, which is not focusing on sort of developing high technology solutions to the future problems, this path to Viksit Bharat is going to remain a challenge. Unless we are internally strong first, unless our society is not getting fractured because of religious issues, socio-political issues, unless we have a secure periphery, I don't think we are going to reach that. The biggest challenge is that we can manage, we can do nothing about Pakistan and China. They are our adversaries. They will do the best to hold us back. But why can't we, or what can we do? I would request you to suggest to make sure that we are internally strong, that our periphery is strong, starting from Maldives to Nepal to Bangladesh to Sri Lanka or to surrounding areas. Unless we do that, do you really feel that that this $35 trillion economy in next 20 years is a possibility? So it worries me. So that's why my question.
Well, no, thank you very much. That's a very thoughtful point. I mean, I think, when you are speaking on a subject, you have to decide what you prioritize and to speak on. If you recall that when I started, I did start with our neighborhood, because I believe that, as in life, you can have friends anywhere, but if you're not in a nice, safe, stable neighborhood, your life is not going to be comfortable. You're going to be constantly in a state of tension. And so that's a starting point. And yesterday in Indian Express, I wrote about this, and I ended by saying we're not paying enough attention to the neighborhood as much as we should. It's a complex issue where we are, as I said, there are structural problems. One, of course, you have a neighbor. We often forget that China is our neighbor also, and that it is now a major power. It's an adversarial relationship. It introduces all kinds of challenges for us. But its capacity also to influence the course of developments in our neighborhood. But we shouldn't be deterred by that. So I think where we have to do more is and remember one more thing, in each of our neighborhood, we are a political factor. And every small country looks for a countervailing power against a large neighbor. This is almost like law of physics. So each of our countries will hedge against us. We have to accept that they will have relationships with China. Our problem is that we need to find a way that it does not become a national security challenge for us, whether it is Maldives, whether it's Sri Lanka, whether it is Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan, Maldives. And it has to be a combination of consistent, persistent delivery of what we do. One is the attitude we take. I mean, do we act like there's great power that wants them to act in particular ways? Or are we in a position to create such strategic dependence through economically that they have nowhere else to go? And if you have 70% of a country's trade with you, 70% of their foreign investment coming from you, 70% of their people coming to study in your institutions, it's a different strategic lever. So you may have political difference, but they will recognize that you have to take into account. So it's a subject that, you know, we can spend an hour discussing, and actually neighborhood, I lament the fact that sometimes we get too caught up in big power relationship and not pay enough attention to what we need to do in our neighborhood. That's one part of thing. But, you know, the definition of neighborhood must change also. I mean, Straits of Malacca is not far from many. If you're standing in Anderson Bay, in Great Nicobar, it's right there, and it is through which all the trade routes pass. So if you look, if Kra Canal comes up in Thailand, it enters straight into Andaman. If China manages to find a base in Chittagong or somewhere, it just changes the calculus. So it's the idea of neighborhood is in our mind. Just as geography, physical geography is immutable, political geography is changeable. So what was Asia Pacific became Indo-Pacific. So our neighborhood definition must change. We must think also of maritime neighborhood as much as we think of our. That's one. The second question you raised about cohesion. Now, I did speak about it. That was the starting point when I said about internal challenges. I spoke about the need for a cohesion in our society because it saps the strength and the internal energy. And we are today what we are, stronger, more united than we were at our birth, is because it's a democracy, it's a federal democracy that has enabled everyone to sing their own music, to practice their faith, to practice their culture, to do what to speak their languages, yet feel a sense of Indianness, yet to come together. And I said, I see this in your armed forces like I don't see it anywhere else. And it is our strength, because if you try to homogenize, you will actually create forces that will want to move away, and there will be internal resistance. So I think that's a foundational principle of our nation. We are unique. We do not have to compare ourselves with anybody else. And right from our independence, everyone had said that we are not going to survive as a state. By 60s, we will collapse. The reason we did is because we accommodated that diversity of identities and the commonality of aspirations of everyone in one big idea of India. And that is why you see where we are. And so we need to nurture that. But that's not something that civil servants or armed forces can do. That's something that is society, that is political leadership, that's their vision. And I think social media has created a kind of a challenge that the world is still grasping with. What it will do to the structures of society and polity is not yet fully understood. I was quoted 5 minutes ago in New York Times where I'd said this, that the so-called instrument of free speech, the freest instrument of free speech, may become the source of undermining the foundations of the institutions that are governed by free speech. And this is something which we have to find the courage, all of us as people, to rise above this, because what we have to be frittered away in narrow sectarian politics. The third is about the education that you mentioned. If you see, I mentioned this on 2 occasions. One is that we cannot be Viksit Bharat without, simply in terms of 35 trillion, 30 trillion, 10 trillion. It has to be with many things, including our leadership in education, in research, in technology, in advanced engineering, in self-reliance. But that skills and productivity of our people, the capacity for general diffusion of technology, the capacity for innovation research is the foundation of our journey, and without it, it will not be. You may have it through this circular economy of the top 10%, but that's not how we wish, or I think that's how the political leadership wishes to see the future in terms of what the Viksit Bharat will be. So what you're saying is absolutely right. Our human resources is what will take us to where we wish to be, not anything else. So in our minds, in our skills, in our values, all three combine to say what you are saying. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ashraf. Any more questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Professor, I'm going to raise a different subject. You talked of more and more investment required into research and development and defense and other subjects. We are sitting on idle wealth in India. Our temples hold the more gold than all the gold reserves of all the developed countries. It is idle wealth. You know, in ancient times, the mandirs used to act as banks. They used to finance traders for their trading. Can we find a way to monetize or to involve the temple wealth in particularly for defense research and defense procurements? Temples, you count today all the temples. Our Somnath temple has the least amount of gold. Why? Because Ghazni took it away. So the temples also require protection. Can they be involved in development of defense?
That's a minefield I'll skip completely. No, I think it's a question that's in a completely different domain altogether. So. I would say that I don't think we have lack of resources. Frankly speaking, we do have resources. We just need to channelize it to the right people. You know, I'll give you some examples. There was a CCS note where an acquisition went through a 4-year painful process between finance and defense on the issue of what is project lifecycle cost. Now, it was a class 101 of management, but after 4 years also, they weren't able to reach a decision. But in that period, we lost 4,000 crores. It is, and where is that accountability? So sometimes, you know, I think you can fix the problems at a simpler level instead of simply talking in terms of grand strategies and grand ideas. And which is why I took some time to speak about the processes. Because if we don't fix that, a lot of our problems will persist and our capability gap will continue to grow. I mean, it's one thing, you know, to speak of rhetoric, it's another thing of reality. And one thing of slogan, another thing is solutions. It's very easy sometimes because of compulsions that we pretend that we are absolutely in the greatest shape of readiness and preparedness. But we all know that we need to do some very major reforms. I mean, you look at Air Force, you look at the Navy, you look at our intelligence, you look at your own army. So our resources are there. It's all about making big changes, radical reforms, bold ones, as we have done in the field of economy at different points of time. Treat a crisis as a moment to bring about those radical reforms, and I think we can get there with the resources that we have. We're not a poor country at all in that.
Yes, please.
I'm very happy that you have discussed about the education. But to my mind, the education as at present in India is more towards the skill and professionalism in that particular skills. Whereas the education has to be for character building. Whereas in India, what I find is that national character has not come about. And in our education, you see, I am so-and-so, I am so-and-so, I am so-and-so. Because our society is diverse. But the question is, first we should be thinking about our own country, what I am, an Indian. But that has not been integrated so far into the education. That's one. Another question is snippet, that in the present circumstances, what should be the action of India towards Pakistan and China? Thank you.
I think you've got a lot of military leaders who will tell you what the action should be towards. No, I think first I can only expect it from a senior military officer to speak about character building, because I mean, so much of what you do, so much of what your training is about instilling that sense of character. I think any nation will succeed only if it has that underlying sense of character, that will, that sense of commitment, that sense of resolve about what integrity that we need to, everything else will follow. When you have the people with the right attitude, you will develop the right skills, you will develop the right innovation. And I think that's what I've seen in China, is the kind of passion that they have towards taking their country, passion and pride towards taking their country to the #1 position. I remember meeting the chief technology officer of Huawei just when the sanctions had started. And he said, you can slow us down, but you cannot stop us. And it was said with not hubris, it was said with a steely resolve of a people that knows that they want to get. And I think what you're saying is right. And as I said, you only hear this word in a Manekshaw auditorium, in a Western command or in a military command. And I really say this with a sense of pride and gratitude, because this is something we need to build across a society. And the other, of course, what was the second point that you had? Okay. That's why I wanted to duck that question. No, the first thing is, there is a dilemma we face. And you look, first is an emotional response to any pain that we have experienced. And there will be. And so we will do a series of diplomatic steps in turn with Pakistan. We've also taken we'll start a series of diplomatic steps internationally, which is UNSC, which is FATF strictures, which will be pressing our partner countries to cut off military assistance to Pakistan. We will also be saying you cannot continue with projects in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. Scale down your non-humanitarian assistance, essentially try to squeeze Pakistan. But that is not necessarily that's going to help. There may be, now, what is Prime Minister has already, in a sense, conveyed a political intent. We have done many things, as I said, over the past. Everywhere in the world, counterinsurgency is a very complex issue. France conducted it using air power, military power in Sahel, and it has, in a sense, not achieved anything. The United States did it in Afghanistan and in Iraq. Pakistan is trying to do that in its own backyard, and then it's very, we've seen that since October 7 in terms of what Israel was trying to do. It's a very, very difficult, I mean, if you think in a very objective, clinical way, we'll have to, so one is that two parts to it. Do you do something that imposes a punitive measure for what has happened? That's one part of it. The second part is, what do you do to dismantle a terrorism that it doesn't happen to us? One, of course, we have to do an honest appraisal ourselves. Do we do an honest appraisal in terms of, I mean, the dilemma for security planners is you can prevent an attack 364 days in a year, but they win only by succeeding once. And that is it's an asymmetry for how big a force you have, you will end up in that situation where something slips, an attack happens. They've got their objective, global attention, inflict a cause, get a country to get completely in a state of pain and rage and grief. So I think there will be a longer term approach which has to essentially, to my mind, is about really trying to put pressure on changing the political structures inside Pakistan towards at what point the cost-benefit analysis will change remains to be seen. For a long time in the past, we had, as you know, a track 2 that took place about finding a Ambassador Satinder Lamba, you know, and during, from 2000, even Prime Minister Vajpayee tried that. Then it continued under Dr. Manmohan Singh. We've had track 2 back with current as well. I don't know. I mean, suppose you go and attack, right? So you may achieve something, you may attain, you may have a political objectives are fulfilled, but do you really will be able to solve this problem in the long run? I don't know. So it'll be a combination of asymmetric, political, military measures in different sequence, in different sort of proportions that will be required to achieve a longer term objective. But for the moment, I think there are no easy solutions, there are no easy answers to a problem of this nature.
Hello. So, I have a very simple question. You see, memories are always short, and so is the life. You have 3, 4 gentlemen at the helm of affairs who are running the world. We saw a change in the presidency in America, and we lost a lot of money. We don't know which direction the share market is going, who's pleasing whom, where the truth lies. So if these 4 gentlemen, if you look at their age factor, they are almost beyond their, I mean, fairly late in life. Is there somebody who's thinking 5 years hence, supposing somebody in America, somebody in Russia, or whoever is in China is no more, what will become of the universe? Is there somebody who's also a think tank thinking on those lines, the future for the world and for us all? Thank you.
Let me give you a very pessimistic picture. For the last 70 years, we have gotten accustomed first to a bipolar world which is caused in a roughly stable conflict. Then we had a unipolar moment which lasted till 2008, the great financial crisis. And since the world has been, in a sense, drifting into what is its natural state, has been historically. Maybe it has also something to do with the end of the industrial age and the rise of the information age, that we are heading towards a far more nebulous, multipolar world without very clearly defined boundaries. And I said countries will be cooperating, colliding, sometimes in conflict, sometimes across different sets of issues. And it's no longer going to be the coexistence of one system and another. It'll be a coexistence of perhaps multiple systems. Is anybody thinking? I don't think anybody knows frankly, where we will end. And I would say that while President Trump may be an extreme, but don't for a moment assume that it will go away with his end of his term, assuming he leaves. As I was saying, when he first ran for presidency, his foreign policy sounded like President Obama's foreign policy. The United States, relative decline in its status in the economy, worn out after 2 wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, had become inward-looking, did not want to be what people crudely call the policeman of the world, didn't want to be the underwriter of the international order. By 2007-8, President Putin had also started expressing himself, Georgia. He expresses intention for Ukraine clearly. On this side, Taiwan is already, there's a mounting pressure on that. So the idea, there was at least some modicum of respect for the notion of territorial integrity and sovereignty. I'm not sure that we'll see that continue necessarily into the future. And where countries fought, big powers fought through proxies, through influence, through shadows. And if President Trump says, I have to take Greenland, or I need Panama, or Canada must be the twin, just sends signals across the world that this is no longer sacrosanct. And that's a problem. So nobody is really, at the moment, I don't see, there is a crisis of leadership. I think one person who really thought about this and thought about the future was President Macron. But I don't think he has that kind of heft to do anything about it in the world. And this is where we really see, I think our Prime Minister has an acute sense of geopolitics, a very, very good idea about where the world is heading in my own conversations with him, what needs to be done, and in a sense that all his conversations with the major leaders have been to try to say that we really do need to find a way to work together for the future and not return to the 19th century kind of competition. You remember his first speech in Tokyo was about that. But all in all, I mean, I think the values or the consensus around the values that underpinned the global system for the last 70 years, that consensus has gone on. What will emerge in the future will be are still unknown. And as far as the stock market is concerned, I mean, for this very reason, I never have invested in it. Honestly, despite having studied finance at IMF, I just don't know how they react to what. So I think here you'll have to be just patient. Market always goes up at some point into the future. So, yes. So patience is rewarded. If one place patience is rewarded, it is in the financial market. So that's me.
Do we have any more questions?
Good afternoon. I'm Major Trivendra. So my question is, like we are fourth in the global firepower index and fifth largest economy. And if we take the power of influence index, then we are among the top countries, top 10 countries. So being the youngest major economy in the world, can we be at the top of the global world order by 2047? Because the areas where we are focusing, like manufacturing, defense, consumer durables and all, but we are not focusing much on the IT sector, where the innovations and R&D are required. Because all the products, whatever we develop, it gets obsolete as the time passes, sir.
I would say you take the indices with a pinch of salt. I mean, who calculates these indices? First, we are the fifth largest economy. We say soon to be the third largest economy. But we are in a strange paradox. We'll be among the largest economy, but not the richest. So you also have to see what your per capita income levels are going to be. How skewed your Gini coefficient is, which is the inequality part of it. And you simply cannot be driving the economy on the strength of the 10% of your population. So we keep repeating this, and I mean, in my own job, when I was there, I would, cite this fifth largest economy, soon to be the third largest. But look where we are. China is in a similar position, maybe not as bad. Largest economy, if you look at your per capita income, still has a long way to go to catch up with the rest of the world. So take that in that perspective. Second, you look where we are still in terms of our innovation capacity, still in terms of, you name an Indian global champion. Any company that is, forget about TCS's, or you look at about top 20 companies in valuation terms. They're Chinese or they're American companies, right? We have to do a lot, much more in terms of investment in R&D. What is the R&D investment? 1%, of which space, atomic energy, and DRDO consume a large share. What does that leave you with? What does your private sector invest in terms of R&D? And where are you? We call us. So you look at the R&D spending of China as 2.5% of an economy which is 5 times larger. We are 1%, as I said. 3 agencies consume most of it. DRDO with questionable output, atomic energy and space. And that just leaves you with a small portion. You have to be able to invest in human resources, in your education, in your skills. It's not just getting BTECs, it's also about how skilled your people are. And it works. If you talk to Apple, I was just talking to the head of Apple the other day. So at their factory in Chennai, the productivity is higher than that of China. But they invested a lot in skilling the people. We need to do this as a priority at the national level. We need to do this not by simply, I'm sorry to say, revising our curriculum and rewriting history books. We need to do that more in terms of investing in education and skills and in R&D that actually delivers. Without it, you will be walking with a technology crutch. You may get the numbers, but your vulnerabilities will not change. Your influence will not change. You will not be a leader. And as I said, you'd find a company from India that is actually anywhere in the global reckoning. You don't have champions.
It's none.
Yeah. So the paradigm has to change. And what the problem is that we can repeat something ad nauseum till we start believing that that is the reality. And that is not the case. So it is important for us to be able to look at things very clinically, very dispassionately if we are to get there. And I worry because sometimes you can get caught in a serious crisis as a result of this. Because complacency can set in if you start believing in a certain set of rhetoric. Let's say if you face a major national security challenge, this will just come out very, very clearly. So it's something which we have to all reflect upon.
Thank you, Mr. Ashraf, for answering the questions from our audience. Thank you very much. As we approach the conclusion of today's session, ladies and gentlemen, it is my honor to welcome Brigadier Russell D'Souza, Commandant Mechanized Infantry Center and School Ahilyanagar, to deliver the closing remarks and vote of thanks.
We have just witnessed the former ambassador of India to France and Monaco, earlier the High Commissioner to Singapore, Sri Javed Ashraf, engaging us in his very distinct, cerebral, and eloquent way on a topic extremely contemporary. And it couldn't be more befitting to have him speak to us on the occasion of the 5th Sundarji Memorial Lecture today. Our speaker, senior veterans in the front row, officers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, as we draw close on this year's General Sundarji Memorial Lecture, it is both befitting and essential to reflect upon the invaluable insights that have unfolded today under the theme Safeguarding the Future National Security on the Path of Viksit Bharat. General Sundarji's visionary foresight, encapsulated within Vision 2100, offers a compelling roadmap for navigating the complexities of modern warfare in the 21st century. The strategic acumen honed through years of military experience and scholarly analysis provides invaluable guidance for nations grappling with the transformative impact of emerging technologies on the battlefield. And today it couldn't be more apt because you've got a mix of very senior officers and youngsters in the rear rows. His visionary leadership and strategic foresight have since long helped in navigating national security's complex and ever-evolving landscape. His legacy inspires us to view security not in isolation, but as a holistic endeavor that integrates diplomatic engagement, technological advancement, strategic foresight, and resilient civil-military cooperation. At the same time, we cannot view India's security in isolation from the wider geopolitical and economic undercurrents influencing the world today. As the global order wrestles with shifting power balances, economic competition, technological rivalries, and resource sharing, military planning must evolve accordingly. The weaponization of trade, supply chain disruptions, and economic sanctions have increasingly become tools of strategic coercion. These economic pressures stimulate military procurement, operational readiness, and even strategic posturing. Furthermore, the rise of gray zone warfare, where the lines between war and peace blur, places a premium on nuanced diplomacy, strategic signaling, and whole-of-nation responses. In such an environment, civil-military relations take on new significance, confirming that military strategies are not only shaped by battlefield imperatives, but also aligned with diplomatic objectives, economic resilience, and societal cohesion. The integration of military strength with diplomatic agility will be indispensable in securing India's national interests amidst these complex cross-currents. Central to India's security architecture is the need to leverage technological advancements while championing self-reliance in critical defense capabilities. As we strive for Atmanirbhar Bharat, our ability to indigenously develop and deploy cutting-edge technologies from artificial intelligence and quantum computing to advanced surveillance and space-based assets will define the contours of our strategic autonomy. Technology is not merely a force multiplier. It is the backbone of modern deterrence, surveillance, border security, and conflict prevention strategies. At the same time, securing our borders, whether on land, at sea, or in the air, requires more than technological superiority. It demands a multi-pronged strategy, one that combines infrastructure development, intelligence sharing, rapid response capabilities, and cross-sectoral cooperation between the armed forces, law enforcement agencies, and civilian institutions. Resilience in border security is not merely about fortification, it is about suppleness, innovation, and the ability to anticipate and adapt to emerging threats. Today's discussion have also highlighted the inextricable link between national security and national growth. A secure India is the bedrock upon which our economic aspirations rest, and a strong, self-reliant India, both economically and militarily, serves as a pillar of stability in a turbulent world. The pursuit for Viksit Bharat must be underpinned by policies that align economic development with strategic resilience, ensuring that technological progress, industrial growth, and human capital development all contribute to the broader goal of national security. As we look ahead, let us remain ever mindful of General Sundarji's spirit of innovation and his fearless commitment to unconventional thinking. His ability to challenge existing paradigms and embrace bold, forward-looking strategies serves as a beacon for one and all of us. The path to safeguarding our future will require not only strength and preparedness, but also dialogue, diplomacy, and adaptability in the face of rapidly shifting geopolitical dynamics. In conclusion, on behalf of Lieutenant General P. S. Shekhawat, PVSM, AVSM, Sena Medal, our Colonel of the Regiment, I extend my deepest gratitude to Shri Javed Ashraf for his time and coming all the way here to share his thoughts with us, the DG Clause, all participants for contributing to this enriching exchange of ideas. We are grateful to the GOC&C Western Command, the Chief of Staff, the GOC 2 Corps, GOC 1 Armored Div, and all ranks who have helped us administratively in hosting the 5th Sundarji Memorial Lecture at Chandi Mandir. A special thank you to our MC, ma'am. Let the insights shared today inspire us to forge ahead with clarity of purpose, strategic foresight, and a steadfast commitment to building a secure, prosperous, and resilient India. May Viksit Bharat emerge not only as an economic powerhouse, but also as a beacon of stability and security, both for its people and the world at large. Thank you. Jai Hind.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to have with us today Lieutenant General H.S. Panag, PVSM, AVSM. I'd like to invite General Panag on the stage to please give away the mementos to our esteemed guests. Mr. Javed, Ashraf, ladies and gentlemen. I would now like to invite on stage Lieutenant General Mohit Wadhwa, Sena Medal, Chief of Staff, Headquarter, Western Command, and I'd request General Panag to please present him with the memento.
May I now take this opportunity to invite and kindly request Ms. Gulmohar Kapoor to please accept the small gift as a token of appreciation from the Mechanized Infantry Regiment.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude today's proceedings. On behalf of everyone present, I extend our heartfelt gratitude to all our distinguished speakers, honored guests, and participants who made this event a resounding success. May the insights and reflections shared today continue to inspire meaningful dialogue and purposeful action as we work towards safeguarding our nation's future on the road to Viksit Bharat. Thank you all for joining us today and making this edition of General K. Sundarji Memorial Lecture a meaningful and memorable one. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move, I would like to request all the speakers and dignitaries and senior officers to proceed outside for a group photograph. After that, ladies and gentlemen, we invite you to join us for lunch at KOI. Thank you and Jai Hind.
You are the very versatile man.